Good morning, y'all. We are back with another edition of DNVR Rams Live. As always, I am your host, Justin Michael. Hope everybody's having a great Thursday morning out there. Hope everybody is able to take a deep breath, maybe a little sigh of relief. The long wait is over. CSU men's basketball has named the new head coach. Ali Farokhmanesh is, in fact, the guy. I think he is who most of the fan base was rooting for to get the gig. I had endorsed him both on this show as well as with the column. I just felt like he was the best choice to, one, give you a shot at some continuity and maybe retaining some of your players. We'll get into all of that. But in a deeper sense, I just feel like he gives you the best opportunity to continue the culture that has been established here under him and Niko Medved over the last 7-8 years. I know that culture can be a bit of a meaningless buzzword, to be honest. Like, what does that even mean? But I do think you can tell, based on the type of guys that CSU has been able to have success with in this program, not only have the Rams done a good job of identifying the right guys from an athletic standpoint and getting guys that are going to translate in that sense, but also guys that are going to buy into what you're trying to accomplish as a program, that are not going to be problematic off the court, that are going to be good students, that are not going to get in trouble and just go about their business the right way. And that may sound corny, but I really do feel like it's been a huge component with what has allowed CSU to be successful here over the last, 6-7 years is just finding the right types of guys. And Ali was a big part of that. He's an incredible recruiter. He's got deep ties locally as well as throughout the Midwest, played at Northern Iowa, got his coaching career started at Nebraska, was then at Drake before he came over to CSU with Niko. So he's got great ties there. He's really tied into Texas as well. And those are the most important recruiting regions for CSU, really. I mean, the Midwest historically has been a place CSU has had a lot of success, both in basketball and football. Texas obviously proves to be key in all sports. And you want to be able to land some of those local guys. So I just feel like he was a no-brainer, especially when you factor in the cost saving and some of the stuff that goes along with it compared to if they had gone with a more experienced coach. I do understand that it is a gamble when you are hiring somebody who's never been a head coach at this level. I also think you can make an argument that with the position the program is in right now, the momentum they have right now, this is a pretty attractive gig. And I do think that it commanded pretty significant interest from high caliber, proven coaches, from what I've heard. And this is from sources I trust, but take it with a grain of salt. It came down to Ali and Tim Miles. A reunion was very much on the table. Tim has done a good job of politicking these last couple of years. I think he's done a good job of repairing the relationship from when he left. There's a lot of people that are never going to forgive him for just the timing of when he left. That was a roster that had a bunch of seniors. You had all the momentum in the world, and then he dips right when they had an opportunity to do something pretty special. That team still ended up making the tournament the next year under Larry, but it just rubbed a lot of folks the wrong way. The timing of it all, I think time has kind of healed some wounds. I also think that people need to understand that when Tim left, CSU was not committed financially to basketball the way that they are now. I mean, at the time, I know Jack Graham is really popular for what he did with the football program, bringing in McElwain, being the catalyst that led to the on-campus stadium. None of that would have been possible without Jack Graham. All-time great CSU Ram, continues to do big things for football. He wasn't good for the basketball program. There was a point where Tim Miles approached him basically with a blueprint for how CSU had an opportunity to become a Gonzaga or a San Diego State. From how I've heard it, Jack Graham basically looked at Tim Miles and was like, what is Gonzaga? Just had no interest in basketball. It's a completely different story these days. Obviously, they've really invested in hoops in a major way. But that is what I've heard, is that it came down to Ali Farokhmanesh or Tim Miles. I think those were probably the two that would have gone over the best. Craig Smith, I think, is another guy that had they gone with him, I think the fans could have talked themselves into it. Another guy with CSU roots, had been to 3 NCAA tournaments at Utah State, so he's proven that he could win in the Mountain West. And either of those guys would have been good options, but I just believe that Ali is a gamble worth taking. And I do want to shout out, by the way, I along with Kevin Sweeney of Sports Illustrated, a couple of other sources, all basically broke this report at the same time. Kevin Sweeney does a great job. There's a lot of national dudes out there who never give local reporters the time of day, who never credit anybody, anything like that. That's not Sweeney. He's my guy, so I shouted him out. After I posted mine, I did think I was first at the time, ended up being second. Doesn't really matter. We all had the same info. It was just a matter of verifying it. Kevin Lytle, Swole, Steve Ivey. I know he had sources that were telling him that the head coaching news was about to drop as well. Getting back to what I was talking about, just in terms of Ali and why I like the hire, despite it being an objective gamble, is just that while you maybe could have gotten a more experienced candidate, it would have, one, costed you a lot more money. Kevin Lytle, he got the contract details, going to make about $800,000. Ali is in year one. It seemed a little small, or it seemed a little light, I guess, at the beginning. But when I looked into some of the other coaches and saw how it compared, I'll get into that a little bit later. I do think it kind of makes sense. I guess we can just get into it now. It doesn't really matter. The highest coach in the league is highest paid coach in the league is Brian Dutcher at $2.4 million. Jared Calhoun is now up to 1.85. Steve Alford of Nevada, 1.3. Leon Rice only makes $1 million a year, which is a little bit surprising to me. And now you have Ali at $800K, just above Tim Miles, Sundance Wicks. That feels about right based on resume and all of that. I don't think you're going to pay Ali off the bat exactly what you were paying Niko Medved, which was close to $2 million. Based on the success Niko had in recent years, he had earned that contract. And I'm sure that if CSU has similar success under Ali, we're quickly going to see him get a new deal done. And you'll see him, probably making closer to that Niko type money. But I feel like to be able to invest in somebody like Ali, who's an up and coming head coach, who's a brilliant offensive mind, who's done just phenomenal work from a player development standpoint. When you look at the guys that have come through the program, almost universally have significantly improved their game under Ali Farokhmanesh. When you look at the leap that guys like Isaiah Stevens and Kyan Evans made really early in their careers. One, yes, they're very talented. But two, I just feel like Ali did a great job of honing in on their skills and just teaching them how to play the game the right way. He's a stellar people person, just goes about things the right way. And you don't want to rip the roots out here of what has been established with this program. Like, you had an opportunity when Tim left to go with an up-and-comer and Niko Medved, a guy who was highly respected, didn't have the name brand recognition that Ali does. I do think that helps his cause as somebody that's the first-time head coach. It helps that people on a national level know his name. He's a March Madness legend. You can't be serious with that shot. That is a clip that will live on for years and years. And there's real value in every single March having your head coach be a name that is synonymous with the tournament, that's going to go viral, that's going to get attention to your program. Like, that is really a strong selling point for him, along with everything we've already talked about, which is the fact that he's just a great dude. I mean, basically universally supported for this opening, which is something that I don't know if I've ever seen. I don't know if I've ever seen one guy basically across the board be viewed as the right option to be the head coach, whether it be the national folks, whether it be the local fans. I've heard that Ali had significant donor support, which is obviously a major factor. You need the people that are opening up their checkbooks to be invested, to be excited about the future. He's who those people wanted. He's who all of the players wanted. Just from what I've seen online, the amount of players that have backed him: David Roddy, Isaiah Stevens, Nique Clifford, Jalen Lake, Nico Carvacho, Josiah Strong, Deshaun Thomas, Chandler Jacobs, Joe Palmer. That's just who I found in about 2 minutes on Twitter that were very vocally propping Ali up, celebrating his hire. I just feel like that speaks to the impact that he's had in this program, the relationship that he's established, both with the guys that have come through, but also with the people in the community, which is a big part of this gig, especially in the NIL era where you are counting on your donor base and your supporters to foot the bill. Now, revenue sharing is coming, and that's another factor into all this. I won't even pretend to be an expert, but I do think it helps that you have a $3 million buyout coming your way, and you're saving some money here in terms of your head coaching salary. That just gives you more money potentially to play with in terms of revenue sharing and all that. That's going to be a big factor. But it's just clear that people are excited. It's clear that he was the guy that the fans wanted. And I do feel like outside of Tim or Craig, it would have been pretty hard to sell anybody to the fans. Like, this is just the guy that everybody wanted. And obviously there's some risk in that. There's the possibility of failure with any hire, but it would really surprise me, based on what I've seen from him over the years, if he was not able to, have a lot of success and kind of continue what has been built here in recent years under him and Niko Medved. You're hoping that you can basically be like San Diego State. And once Steve Fisher retired, he passed the torch to Brian Dutcher and honestly took things to the next level. Like the tournament success that's happened under Brian Dutcher, the run that they've had in terms of conference championships has been even more dominant than when an all-time great like Steve Fisher was there. And I just feel like that really gives you like incentive to try and keep this going, as you've seen the blueprint. And I mean, we've even seen it at other schools. Like, this doesn't have to be the end of the party. And I just think that the future is very bright for this program. Donations have already jumped like 25% on this most recent fundraising campaign. I think it was something like 87 donors yesterday afternoon. It's now up to like 120. They're up over 20K. I remember whatever gets donated is going to get matched. So an opportunity here for the fans to really show their support and help the future of the program. I am going to talk about what comes next in terms of building a staff, roster retention, all of that. Shout out to everybody that's in the Toyota chat, by the way, if you wouldn't mind giving us a thumbs up on YouTube. Appreciate everybody that's rocking with us. I just wanted to give a couple of thoughts on, I'm not going to say it's a problem, but I do think it's a mindset issue that Ram fans struggle with at the moment in terms of wanting the next Sonny Lubick. Ali hasn't even coached a game yet, and I have already had multiple people reach out and ask me, is he the next Sonny? Is he in it for the long haul? Is it going to be forever? And realistically, probably not. That's just the reality in 2025. The odds of another Sonny Lubick in any sport, pretty slim. I will say, Ali has wanted this job for a long time. He's turned down other opportunities at smaller schools in order to wait for when Nico jumps to be in the running and hopefully land this gig. He's got 4 young kids. Like, I don't think that he is going to be chomping at the bit to jump up as soon as he has that opportunity. He's worked under Tim Miles. He's worked under Niko Medved. I think he'll understand the value of being in a place where you have institutional support, you have a community that rallies around you, you have a great home court advantage. According to Ken Pom, Moby Arena, one of the top 25 home court advantages in college basketball. He knows that he's got a good thing going here. And if he has success, CSU has proven that they will invest even more, bump his paycheck up, all of that stuff. But I just feel like we've got to change our mentality a little bit. Sure, we can hope that another Sonny Lubick, comes through here. But if that is what you're expecting to happen, I do think you're setting yourself up for disappointment. And I've made this point before, and I know that people really don't like it, but I'm not sure that Sonny would be able to be as loyal to CSU in 2025 as he was in 2000. The disparity in resources has always been there, but the gap is wider than it's ever been. There's just real financial incentive. Like, there are crazy differences in resources between some of these schools, and I do think we just need to understand that. I'm not saying you have to be Utah State and get poached year after year after year. That's certainly not the hope. But if you're having success, it's a good thing for your program if you're successful enough to have a coach that's, wanted by some of these bigger programs. The hope is they don't just jump for anything. A lot like Niko Medved, who turned down Oklahoma State. You hope that they'll stick around and not just make any type of jump up. But if you're winning, if you're having success, if you're going to the tournament 3-4 times for every 5 years, basically, if you're only having to replace your coach once a decade or so, but you're having the type of success that we've seen in recent years, then you're in a good spot. And yes, I hope to see him stick around for a long time. Ali is my guy. Consider him a friend. I'll certainly be rooting for him. But I just think we have to understand that things are different in the modern landscape. And if day one, before he's ever even coached a game, you're already worried about him leaving, you're not going to be able to enjoy any of the moment. And I get why a lot of us are scorned. We've seen it happen before. It feels like every time things really get rolling, boom, the guy leaves, goes to a bigger school. But I think you just kind of got to hope for as much sustained success as possible, and hope that however it does come to an end someday, that it can be in as ideal of terms as possible. And I think Niko going out as a conference champion with the showing that they had in the NCAA tournament, that's about as good of terms as you could hope for as a fan base. Like, most coaches get fired. A few of them are able to retire on top, but even Sonny wasn't able to do that. So I just think that I think we've got to change our perspective a little bit in terms of what we are hoping for. And more than anything, I think the hope just needs to be successful. And, if it turns out in a couple of years he's rumored for bigger gigs, that means obviously we're winning, and you just hope to keep it rolling. I just think to worry about that on day one is not a very fun recipe for success as a fan base. And I think you're just kind of setting yourself up to be disappointed in the end. And I just don't know if that's necessary. So that's my 2 thoughts. That's my 2 cents on all of it. I really feel like this was the right hire. I do think that, Ali, like Niko, is invested in Fort Collins and will not jump just for any old gig. But you've got to understand what the world is, and we'll worry about those things when they happen. Right now, I just want to hopefully see this program maintain things and keep it rolling. And obviously our focus turns to building a staff and roster retention. We're going to get into all of that real quick. We do need to pay the bills. We got to shout out some of our partners. Coors Light encourages you to choose a chill mindset between work, family, life in general. It's easy to get worked up. You want to rise above and choose that chill state of mind. Life is all about how we deal with the things that come our way. When the mountains turn blue, cold as the Rockies, Coors Light is cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged for a smooth finish. When you embrace a chill mindset, it's a good time to choose chill and crack open a Coors Light. Coors Light is mountain cold refreshment. Choose chill this winter, then reach for a Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door by visiting CoorsLight.com/DNVR, or find it pretty much anywhere that sells beer. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. I would also like to shout out our friends over at Shady Rays. Guys, when your future is as bright as CSU's is, you might want to pop on the Shady Rays. You don't want to get blinded. Check out the incredible assortment that they have to offer. What's great about Shady Rays, they've got thousands of different styles. They're bound to have something for you, probably even in multiple color options. Shady Rays, an independent sunglasses company. They offer a world-class product that's rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. Exclusively for our listeners, Shady Rays is giving out the best deal of the season. Go to shadyrays.com, use that code DNVR for 35% off polarized sunglasses. Try for yourself the shades rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. Aaron Harris says, I'm guessing the fans would have been okay if Coach K took the job. I suppose he would have been an all right option had Coach K decided to get back in the biz. Although people were pretty dead set on Ali. I haven't really seen universal support for one candidate in any sport quite like what he is getting right now from the fan base. Aaron wants to know, do you know how much Ali was making last year as an assistant? I believe it was around like 400,000. So basically, believe he doubled his salary, jumping up from the associate head coach to the head coach position. Don't quote me on that. I'm sure there's somewhere we could verify that. But I do believe his assistant pool is going to be about 1.2 million. We'll talk about some potential assistant coach options here momentarily. The big focus, obviously, right now, and this is probably the most important element for anybody that lands a job in 2025, is roster retention, being able to keep some of the guys that have put you in this position. You know, one of the more remarkable things about this run that CSU had was you had the veterans at the top. You know, you had Nique Clifford, you had Jalen Lake, and then even the Ethan Mortons and Bowen Bournes of the world. You started 3 sophomores and had Japa coming off the bench, as well as true freshman Kyle Jorgensen. I mean, to make the run that the Rams did this past season with 5 underclassmen is pretty freaking remarkable. And the hope is that you're able to at least hang on to a fraction of these guys. I think, being realistic, a lot like I said with the whole Sonny Lubick stuff, you're probably not going to be able to hang on to everyone. This team had an incredible showing down the stretch. It's basically one giant audition. There's no rules anymore when it comes to tampering. The minute that CSU went off against Memphis, I guarantee you that Kyan Evans, all these guys had coaches, players, representatives, whatever, in their DMs and their agents' DMs already trying to broker deals. It is what it is. It's not worth throwing a fit over at this point. This just is the game. But it's going to be tough. I said it last weekend, but I think the price tag went up for some of these guys that you're hoping to hang on to because of the way that they performed on that big stage. I don't like doing it this way, but I know that a lot of people have asked me. So if I had to say, in terms of importance, I think you're really trying to hang on to Kyan Evans and Jalen Crocker-Johnson. I think those two will command the most interest from high major programs. Kyan has just, I mean, he's a star. What he can do as a 3-point shooter, his ability to create his own shot anywhere on the floor, his explosiveness, that ability to get to the rim, it's all there. And he really grew as a passer this year and a facilitator, a playmaker for others. I think his future is an all-conference player of the year type guy. Like, I really think he can be that good. Crocker-Johnson, a 4 that can stretch the floor, but can also post up on you, play with his back to the basket, a guy who can hang with bigger guys. I thought he really was impressive physically against the size and athleticism that both Memphis and Maryland were able to throw at the Rams. Like, those guys really showed out in the tournament. And because of that, they're going to have some real offers, guys. Like, the money that's being thrown around in college basketball is absurd. And I think the guys deserve to get paid. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to do that old man rant or anything like that. I do think the option to basically be a free agent every 6 months to transfer year after year is maybe not best for the health of the sport, or really what's in the best interest of a lot of these guys who are maybe getting some short-term money, but probably walking away from a lot of credits. A lot of these players don't end up finishing their degrees. And the reality is that most players aren't going to, make an NBA living. That's just the stone cold truth. But this is what we have now. So we've got to look at the situation realistically. And I certainly hope that guys like Isaiah Stevens, David Roddy, Nique Clifford are assisting with this recruitment process, that are preaching loyalty, that are saying, look what happens if you can stick around. Yes, there might be a little bit more money in it for you. Maybe you'll play for a school that's got flashier facilities, a Nike deal in a bigger league, all of that. But are they going to look out for you the way that CSU does? Are they going to give you an opportunity to thrive in the same way? I mean, look at Nique Clifford at CSU versus when he was at CU. Look at what David Roddy was able to do. If he signs with Minnesota out of high school, is he a first-round pick after just 3 years? I doubt it. Isaiah Stevens is an NBA guy now because he stuck around. Like, could he have gotten a payday and gone to one of those Big 12 programs? Without a doubt. And they sure as hell tried to do it. He was fielding offers from the Texas Techs and the Big 12 teams for years. He chose to stick around. It worked out pretty well for him. Nique might be a lottery pick at this point. His draft stock is really going through the roof. The last I saw, Kevin O'Connor had him going 13th to Atlanta, which would make him a lottery pick, which is just absurd to think about. I think it's been more than proven over these last couple of years that if you stick around in this offensive system, and maybe it shifts a little bit without Medved, but Ali was in charge of a lot of the offensive sets. So he had a really big input in what they were doing anyways. You can make a name for yourself and you can be a first round pick, which is a really strong selling point that CSU did not have for a really long time. And again, realistically, do I think they're going to be able to hang on to all these guys? No. But if you can hang on to a couple of them, that's still a really good core to build the foundation of this roster around. Right now, and this is based under the assumption that you do have everybody, really need a couple of wings after losing Lake and Clifford. You're going to need another point guard with Bowen Bourne out of the mix, potentially more than one. We'll see what happens there, but those are the biggest needs, I would say. You could always use a 5, but Anthony says in the Toyota chat, a couple inside sources within the program have told me loyalty looms large for Cayenne over money. Fingers crossed, hoping that's true. Cayenne's a great kid. He really is. And I do think he has proven that he has a level of maturity that's beyond his years. I don't think a lot of Gatorade players of the year would have been as patient as Cayenne was as a freshman and willing to really soak up the knowledge that was being passed down from Isaiah Stevens. I mean, he was kind of like his little protege last year, and it was awesome to see. That's exactly what you're hoping for. I do think that Cayenne is really tight with Ali. I think that he loves CSU. I also think that there's probably life-changing money being thrown his way, and it'll be tough to fault him if he ultimately does chase that bag, because obviously he's good enough for it. I think the thing that always rubs mid-major fans the wrong way is when these guys do leave. It's like, man, none of these big schools were even giving you the time of day. We're the school that gave you an opportunity to play early, to shine, and now you're going to jump at the first opportunity. But again, I've never been in a position where I've had $700K thrown my way. Like the money that's getting thrown around in college basketball is crazy, and I really think he could command like upwards of $1 million if the right school was interested in him. If I had to estimate what CSU could come together, what they could come up with for him, maybe like 600,000. I will say there's a real commitment from the donors right now in trying to keep this rolling. I do think people understand the spot that CSU is in, so maybe they could jump that number up a little bit. But him and Croc, I do think, could be very attractive to some pretty big schools, and even somebody like Bemba. Like, you never know. I'm hoping they can hang on to Jorgensen. He's a Minnesota kid. I think offensively he's got a very bright future. I'd love to see Bemba stick around too. If I had to say who I feel, I'm not even going to do that. It doesn't matter. There's no point in speculating in terms of like who I feel would be most likely to leave or anything like that, because I can't speak for these kids. But being able to hang on to a handful of these guys is going to be huge in terms of the type of success that you can expect in year one. I think if you hang on to everyone, you should be right there in the mix, especially with the turnover that's happening at Nevada and New Mexico, and San Diego State's losing a bunch of guys to the portal. Boise, they won't have Dagenhart anymore. Like, there's probably going to be an opportunity to take the league by storm next year if you're able to have some significant talent on this roster. But it is going to be interesting to see kind of what happens there. I think that's the biggest factor and probably the biggest priority, or at least it should be for CSU right now, is doing everything that you can to try and keep some of these guys Monty says, what about the freshmen, including the red shirts and the stud guard coming in this year? Those are really big priorities for you as well. Like Jojo McKeever, I'm not 100% sure how you pronounce it. I think it's McKeever. He looks like a stud out of Texas. I hate putting this type of lofty praise, but he looks like the Isaiah Stevens, the Kyan Evans model of how did this point guard fall through the cracks like this? Because he is a gifted scorer, incredibly athletic, and basically everything I've heard is he's got that Kyan Isaiah type mentality of just lives for basketball, doesn't care about the flash or the credit or anything like that. He just wants to go out there and ball, and he wants to win. You really want to be able to hang on to him, as well as, Jonathan Mekinen is a guy that I've heard is as athletic, if not more, than David Roddy and Nique Clifford. Like, that's the type of explosiveness he has. He's really raw, needs to refine things, but you've got some young talent that you would love to hang on to. And if you're Niko Medved, I think, some of these guys you'd love to be able to bring over with you as well. And I can't really speak for what the mindset is of any of these players, but they certainly are very high on the priority. And like, retaining the young talent that you have in the building will be as important, if not more important, than the work that you do in the portal this year. Now, if you lose everybody, now all of a sudden, the portal is going to be super important, and you're going to have to sign, 7-8 guys, which is a really tough spot to be in. But we'll just have to see how this all plays out. I would say, though, keeping Kyan is your biggest hope. Croc is right there as well. The more guys that you can keep from this spring, the better chance you have to hit the ground running. We're going to talk about the staff here in just a second. Let's take one more quick break before I go too long. Shout out a couple more of our partners. Mando is a men's full deodorant brand that's not your it's not your standard deodorant, I should say. It's not the deodorant you're used to, which is just for your underarms. You can put it anywhere that's going to be stinky. You can put it on your belly button, your butt crack, your balls, your grundle, and more. They've got scents like bourbon leather, Clover Woods, Mount Fuji, and Pro Sport. What's really cool about Mando is you can be assured that it's going to work. It was created by a doctor that saw firsthand how BO was being misdiagnosed and mistreated. 12 hours after a shower, the average man's grundle odor was a level 5 out of 10. With Mando, the average grundle odor level is a 0 out of 10. Science, baby. Mando's starter pack is perfect for new customers. It comes down with a solid stick deodorant, cream tube deodorant, plus 2 free products of your choice, like the mini body wash or deodorant wipes. You're also going to get free shipping. As a special offer for our listeners, new customers get $5 off starter pack with the exclusive code that equates to over 40% off your starter pack. Use that code DNVR at shopmando.com, shopmando.com. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Smell fresher, stay drier, boost your confidence from head to toe with Mando. If you're going to be doing some camping, some tailgating, whatever, get yourself a Rugged Road cooler. They are perfect for any condition. One of the cool, unique features about Rugged Road coolers is not only are they lightweight, they're not one of those big ass heavy ones from the 80s. Trying to drag those uphill it's a workout. It's nice and lightweight. Also, if you're on a boat or something like that, if it falls off, it will always float upright, which is a really cool feature. Get ready for the summer ahead with Rugged Road coolers. Go to ruggedroadoutdoors.com. Use that code DNVR for 10% off your order. Lightweight, durable, always floating upright, perfect on land or in water. Leave that old heavy cooler at home and get yourself a better cooler for the new season. Rugged Road, your ultimate outdoor companion. All right, keep the questions, comments, etc. rolling in the Toyota chat. If I don't get to it immediately, we will star it and come full circle at the end. Appreciate the engagement. Again, if you're watching live on YouTube, wouldn't mind giving us a thumbs up. I certainly would appreciate it. If you're listening on the audio only side later on, if you wouldn't mind giving us a 5-star review, comment how much you love the show, or you can comment how much you hate the show. That's fine. But if you give me the 5-star review, I'll take it. If you want to throw a little bit of heat, it's all good with me. Just help me with the metrics. I certainly would appreciate y'all. Brett says, could you see any Mountain West transfers landing at CSU? I've had a couple of people asking me to dive into this topic. So I will come up with the list and we can talk about it this weekend. All this stuff works really quickly, but there's always a small handful of guys that make a lot of sense. Off the top of my head, I don't have anybody that I'm like, man, they have to go after him. Alvaro Cardenas was a guy who I really wanted them to land last year. We're in on him, came close. It actually ended up working out well that they didn't sign him because it allowed Cayenne to have the ascension that he was able to have this season. But there will certainly be a couple of guys that are worth pursuing. And again, I'll come up with a list for you guys. And keeping it rolling here with the conversation of what comes next for CSU men's basketball. Obviously, roster retention is a big part of it. Staff retention, though, I think is a pretty big factor as well. I am really high on Tim Shelton. I think what he's done with the guys in the front court these last couple of years has been a huge part of what has allowed the Rams to kind of make a leap. Everybody tries to follow that San Diego State blueprint. Yes, you want to be able to score, but what really translates in the postseason, what allows you to have the type of sustained success that they've had there is the ability to defend at a high level. When you look at the metrics, CSU these last 2 years, by far the best defensive teams of the Medved era. And it's going to be a big factor if the Rams are going to be able to sustain this. Shelton played at San Diego State. He left Oregon State for CSU. He has been very active on social media in terms of sharing stuff that's very pro Ali. It seems like they've got a good relationship. To me, it kind of seems like Tim Shelton and Ken DeWeese will stick around. Swole Steve Ivey in the Toyota chat says, I'm hearing some positive things regarding Shelton. I have as well. He's another guy that I could see a big school coming in and offering big money to, but you hope those relationships will be a big factor. Ken DeWeese was Jeff Linder's number 2 guy at Wyoming. Came over last year, I believe, might have been 2 years ago now. He and Ali are pretty tight. I imagine he'll be the associate head coach if he sticks around. That would make a lot of sense to me. It does seem like both Joe Deciman and Brian Cooley will be following Medved to Minnesota, which is unsurprising. Also going to keep Thorson around. Why I was excited or why I was optimistic about the possibility of hanging on to Shelton was with Thorson being on that Minnesota staff. That's kind of Shelton's role in Fort Collins. So it kind of makes more sense for him to stick around outside of maybe getting a bigger offer from a high major or something like that. But I think if you can keep those 3, Ali is the head guy, Ken DeWeese, and Tim Shelton, you are in a really good spot. If you have to replace the whole staff, that's kind of a difficult situation, especially because, some of the guys that you maybe would have anticipated being in the mix under Ali, like an Aaron Katsuma, he's going to be following Richard Pitino to Xavier. I love that Pitino is being loyal to his guys and taking the whole staff with him. I feel for New Mexico. Talk about a brutal calendar year to be a New Mexico Lobo fan. It was obviously a very fun basketball season. And even the football season was kind of fun in terms of their team from a viewership standpoint, Devin Dampier and Wysong and all that. But first they got left behind. The Pac-12 didn't take them. Even with all the success they had in football, they still only finished 5-7 and then watched their star quarterback, their leading receiver, their top 2 running backs, and basically everybody that was worth a damn walk out the door, as well as Bronco Mendenhall, who left for a school that at the moment is still in the same school. And now from a basketball standpoint, you are probably going to have to start over because it looks like all the stars are leaving. Pitino's gone. All the assistants are going. It's just been brutal for my friends in Albuquerque. So I'm sending some positive thoughts their way. I'd like to see them hire Tim Miles. I think that Tim learned from the Nebraska ordeal and then being at San Jose State. If you are in a good spot, the grass is not necessarily always greener, even though the money may be. He's a winner. He's won at places with far less financial commitment, with far less resources at his disposal than he would have at New Mexico. He was a finalist when they hired Pitino, a lot like Medved was a finalist at Minnesota, and they went with Ben Johnson, excuse me. I would assume that he'll be in the mix again there. I feel like UNLV should have hired him, to be honest. They always go for the flashy name and the appeal of that. And what they really need is just somebody that's a program builder and can establish a little bit of consistency. But I do hope that Ali gets I hope that Tim gets an opportunity at New Mexico. And I do think that it'll be fun to root for him, like, especially since we're not going to be in the same league. If we were going to be in the same league for the next decade, I wouldn't have necessarily wanted to have to root against him all those times. And again, I just think he's a really good coach. I think he can be a pain in your side, but I just feel like he deserves an opportunity to make a jump up, because San Jose State is just a disaster of a program. The only D1 team in the Mountain West I've ever seen travel to CSU and not bring a radio team, like not even a one man. It was absolutely insane. They didn't send an SID. Like, I think I could have just walked into the San Jose State locker room and there wouldn't have really been anybody to stop me other than the players or the coaches. And Tim's so chill with the media, he probably would have been like, all right, just give me a second. Never seen anything like it. There are high school teams that have more resources than San Jose State basketball does. All right, kind of went on a tangent there. Got a little bit off track, which is my bad. Some other guys you could maybe keep an eye on, assuming that you are going to try and hang on to Shelton and DeWeese. Maybe bring Dorian Green over from UNC. There were a lot of people that were pushing for Steve Smiley to get the job at CSU. I think Smiley would have been a hire that makes sense. I think he, a lot like Tim Miles, is a guy who has proven to be able to win at a smaller school and have success without the same type of cash as some of the other programs in his league. He's really got an eye for talent. Unfortunately, they haven't been able to retain some of those guys because they've got no money. But when you look at how they've been able to keep this going, despite losing Dalton Connect and St. Thomas, and I'm drawing a blank on his name at the moment, but their best guard at the moment, Langston Reynolds, he's jumping into the transfer portal. He would have made sense. I don't think that he would have moved the needle quite like Ali has. I think Tim Miles would have been a more popular pick, and I honestly think that Craig Smith would have been a lot more popular than Smiley as well, because at least at that point, he's a CSU guy. He's proven that he can win in the Mountain West 3 NCAA tournaments. For all the talent and all the success that they've had against all odds, they still have not been able to make the NCAA tournament under Smiley. I don't really think that's his fault necessarily in a one bid league. It's just really tough. If you don't win your conference tournament, you're not going to make it. But this would be a pretty big jump. And guys in the past, when they've made that leap, whether it be Linder or Tad Boyle back in the day before he went to CU, they had a little bit more on the resume than Smiley does at this point. But I really do think he's a good coach, and he's a guy that has an eye for talent. Obviously, bringing in someone like Dorian Green was really cool, but maybe CSU could snag him from UNC. I'd love to see, especially with Joe Deciman moving on, having somebody like Dorian Green or Joe Palmer, or just somebody that's been in the program that has, a hope to coach. I always think that whenever he ultimately decides to hang it up, Isaiah Stevens would be a phenomenal basketball coach. And if he does ever to go that route, I hope it's at CSU and not at Minnesota with Medved. All love to my guy. But, we bleed green and gold around here, so we're rooting for the Rams. Those are the names I'd keep an eye on at the moment. Yeah, I mean, we could speculate a million dudes that have been at CSU at one point or another. CJ Rivers, maybe he could be interested in coming back, although he's at Marquette right now. So without a pretty big jump in pay, I'm not sure that's happening. But yeah, those are some guys I would keep an eye on. Aaron says, I would love to see Joe Palmer in the Joe Deciman role. I would too. That feels like a perfect fit for him. Any of these guys, though, like Nico Carvacho, I would love to see back in the mix. I feel like Chandler Jacobs would be a really good coach if he decided to go that route. And he's got a great relationship with Ali. Basically, Ali is the reason that he ended up coming over instead of going to Texas Tech. There was some other stuff involved in that process. Texas Tech kind of offered him a scholarship and kind of somewhat pulled it at the end. But that relationship with Ali was a big reason he ultimately ended in Fort Collins. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there. I think the big thing, regardless of what you do from a staff standpoint, from a roster standpoint, you just want to see this continued investment in CSU men's basketball. I mentioned earlier that the program when Tim Miles left is not the program that it is today. Didn't have the same aspirations as a university. You have committed to hoops in a major way. You want to continue that, especially with the $3 million buyout that you've got coming in. You're saving $1 million a year on your head coach salary now. Continue to invest that money back in the program and help it grow. You can't just stay where you're at. Stagnation will be the death of you in this modern era. Moby could certainly use some upgrades. I know that that's a thing that's been explored quite a bit by the administration behind the scene. Now kind of feels like the perfect time, this next year and a half or so before you get into the Pac-12. Can you create the type of facilities that compare to some of these bigger programs? Like, they did a great job with the locker room. I think the energy in Moby, it compares to, anywhere, any school of this size. Like, it's a great rockin' place when it's stacked and people are into it like they have been. I will say, and this is completely random, just a little aside, having gone to a lot of these Mountain West tournaments, having been in a couple of the other buildings around the league, I do wish that CSU fans were a little bit more consistently chaotic. I think we have a classier fan base than maybe some of the other big time programs we see in the Mountain West. I don't see CSU fans starting shit in the stands in the same way that I see New Mexico, UNLV, San Diego State, even Utah State fans. They won't curse at you or anything like that, but man, will they get a little nasty when it goes back and forth with trash talking and all that. But I think that CSU fans could be a little more ruckus. I think we could be a little more energetic. I don't know if it's maybe because we have a little bit of an older crowd typically, but I do feel like there's an area or there's room there for this fan base to be just a little bit rowdier. The support's there. People are showing up. It's great. You just want Moby to be viewed as like a truly hostile place. And the crowd factor is a big part of that. Yes, it could use a facelift. Yes, you could use more luxury seating. I could use an upgrade to concessions, all of that. Just modernize it. It's got great roots. We don't need a new basketball arena. We just need to modernize the one that we have, and that'll be big for recruitment and, player retention, all of that. Like, it's just a really big factor. We'll see what happens. I think those are really key, though, over the next couple of years. Before we get out of here, I did want to talk a little bit of CSU football. I have not been able to be quite as locked into football this week as I maybe had hoped to be. The coaching search has taken a big priority. It went on a little bit longer than I anticipated, although I did say on Monday that ideally you would have a head coach announced within 24 to 48 hours. It was basically exactly 48 hours. It was a legitimate search. Like, they highly considered other guys. They hired a search firm, which I've seen a lot of people mock. To me, maybe a little bit of a waste of money, but I understand that a lot of ADs just view it as the process. Like, you want to have an impartial evaluator in the mix. I get all of that. But when it's like the most obvious candidates in the world, Tim Miles, Craig Smith, Ali, feels like a little bit of a waste of money. They could have paid me $50K. I probably could have came up with the same list that they had. But ultimately, they ended up with the right guy. That's what matters. But we'll obviously be talking a lot of spring football here as we get closer to the weekend, and then especially next week and into the spring game. I'll have some Avalanche coverage as well, so I'm going to be a busy guy. It's going to be a little bit of a whirlwind, but I'm looking forward to it because there's a lot of questions I have about this football team defensively. There's a lot of questions I have offensively at the moment. I mean, who's going to be the star pass catcher now that Lewis Brown is no longer on the team? We're going to talk about all that. Let me take just a quick breather. We'll get into it. All right. Keep the questions, comments rolling. Again, it can be hoops related. We can come back to it after. I did just want to hit on football briefly, though, because we are in the first week of practice here, hoping to be out there Saturday before the afternoon Avs game. Get a look at some of these guys, not in full pads yet. There's not that much to be taken away yet anyways. But you were hoping that LB would be the guy. That was supposed to be the feel-good story. It was for about 2 months. Now he's not on the team anymore. It's a shame. He's a guy that has NFL caliber talent and athleticism. They really wanted him to be the guy, and that was the plan all along. Didn't work out. Wish the guy the best. Hopefully he's able to work through some of these issues. But can Jordan Ross be the guy? He was the highest rated recruit in that class last year. Popped as the season went along. We saw him, assume a larger role within that offense. Not the biggest guy in the world, but he runs well, got great hands, just a really natural athlete. Based on everything that I've seen from him so far and everything that I've heard, he's a lot like Torrey Horton, just lives on the football field, wants to dominate. I think he's got great potential, but that's asking for a pretty big leap from him from year 1 to year 2. Maybe Armani Winfield can be the guy that we hoped he would be when he came over from Baylor. I think he flashed. The athleticism is certainly there. He can run with the best of them. Had some drops. That's something we're going to need to see more consistency with him. I think really all the receivers can be more refined with their route running. I think that was the biggest thing that we saw once Torrey Horton was no longer out there. There would just be times where guys weren't quite as locked in with their route running plays, where maybe Torrey creates that separation on the comeback and somebody like Caleb Goody doesn't, fight for the ball the same way. And some of that just comes with inexperience. Like, these guys just need live reps against D1 corners. There's only so much you can simulate and practice and all that. Like, game experience is better than anything, but it's a factor. They need somebody to be more consistent there. The drops were an issue. The route running was not consistently good enough this past season. Hopefully having a little bit of continuity and not having it be what it's been the last couple of years, which is hoping that it'll be Torrey and then he gets hurt and then you're trying to bank on the fly. You build somebody else up. They decide to leave via the portal. Like, it's just been a revolving door at that number 1 wide receiver spot for CSU. And I think that's been a factor with BFN. I think not having any continuity within his receiving core is going to be a factor, as is completely changing your offensive philosophy, running a completely different scheme. What they look like this year will be really interesting to me. It almost doesn't matter what they do in spring, to be honest, because the team we saw in spring and even most of fall camp last year was closer to an air raid offense. And then by the time week 1 came around, it was none of what we had seen for months and months. I hope it's not a situation like that again. I understand the logic, why they did it. And I do think they were probably more competitive because of it. They just didn't have the receiving core that they hoped last year to be that type of offense. Whether they will this year or not is to be seen. There are guys you're really excited about. Armani Winfield, Jordan Ross, maybe Dylan Goffney can get back to his former self. Like, if he could make a leap, that would be huge for CSU. I would love to see Kojo Antwi come in and make a big splash from Ohio State. Could he be the next Preston Williams? Didn't get in trouble like Preston did, but be a guy that was incredibly revered nationally in the high school recruitment process, signed with the big program, was supposed to be the big deal there. Maybe facing a little bit lesser competition, a little smaller and little less athletic corners will allow him to really stand out. I've talked about it, and I don't mean this in a petty way, but with a guy like Caleb Goody, who has a lot of room to grow as a receiver, has great potential, great potential, but that speed stands out a little bit more when you're running against UTEP, when you're running against San Jose State, then it's going to, against the top Oklahoma State corner or, something like that. I do think that Antwi's athletic profile, on paper, he could really thrive this year. Now, he's never been that guy at the collegiate level, and that could just be because Ohio State was so absurdly talent rich. Like, that receiving room the last 5 years has just been insane. I do think there's a very realistic path where he comes here and pops. You hope somebody like Tommy Maher can make a jump. Levon Brown, saw more playing time as the season went along. They've got a lot of sophomores, juniors that are going to be hoping to make a big mix, and just getting 2-3 of these guys to pop is going to be such a huge key for CSU. It's not just the receivers, though. They've got to get more production from the tight ends. I don't mean this as a slight at him, but I'm shocked that Vince Brown landed at Missouri. It's shocking to me. Like, the guy struggled to get open. He had drop issues. Thought he was a really good teammate, good kid. I enjoyed talking to him. But CSU really felt the loss of Dallin Holker last year, and they didn't have a tight end that was productive the year before that. And you could see the difference with how lethal CSU's passing offense was when they were able to consistently attack the middle of the field with Dallin Holker versus the year before and the year after, where everything was dependent on the guys outside. And if you weren't able to pop screens, if you weren't able to get some of those crossers rolling, and the vertical game wasn't going, like the passing offense was just inconsistent. Having that safety blanket in the middle of the field is so big for sustaining drives, gives you a red zone threat. And what's encouraging is I've heard really good things about Rocky Beers now from a couple of different people. So maybe he can be that Holker transfer type guy that comes in, makes a huge impact for you. I'm hearing good things. Jackson Warren, I don't believe is cleared yet. So hopefully he's able to get healthy before the season. If you could have both those guys and go, some 12 personnel, that would be really, really big. But we shall see what happens with all that. And then finally, like, can any of these running backs make a difference as a pass catcher? I think you really got to go back to Dalen Dawkins before you had somebody that did it with any type of consistency. And I think that Dupree and Marshall both have that skill set, at least the athleticism, to be the type of guy that could catch a swing pass, like could catch a quick screen and make an impact for you. They certainly can make guys miss. But I think those are going to be really big factors for the passing offense going to the next level this year, is getting more consistency from that tight end position and getting more production from the running backs out of the backfield in terms of the pass catching game. Just think it would be really big for the quarterback. I think it would take some pressure off of him and put him in a situation where, he doesn't have to be Superman, which is the hope. He's got plenty of arm talent. We've seen it. We've seen him be money in some really big stretches. But he needs some of these guys around him to step up. And that's a fact. Like, didn't play super great in the bowl game. But I also don't know how much I can really fault him given the lack of receivers he had out there, the wonkiness of that matchup. There were some weird circumstances, all things considered. Gotta be better with some of his decisions. Like, he had a couple of bad turnovers in that game. But again, I just think that there has been a lot that's been left to be desired from the receiving group these last 2 years. I'll just put it that way. All right, if you're listening on TV, you can head over to thednvr.com to catch the last couple of minutes here. Otherwise, just keep on rocking with us. Before we get out of here, I'm going to answer your questions, comments. I did just have one thing I wanted to say about football and the bar being raised. I alluded to this a little bit last weekend, but I think the bar has been raised for CSU athletics. I think the standard is higher than what it was 10 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever. You've got an administration that has pumped money into athletics in a serious way. But with what the men's basketball program has done these last couple of years, I think it puts some real pressure on football, on volleyball, on women's hoops to take it to the next level. I think the status quo, what was acceptable in the past, is not going to be acceptable anymore, especially going into the Pac-12. I think there's a lot of pressure on CSU football right now. I said last year that it needed to be the floor for the program. That can't be the ceiling. Like, that needs to be the standard and the baseline. And despite the fact that they won 8 games and beat a couple of rivals last year, like, I think there is a lot of pressure on Jay to get this team to a Mountain West championship, to sweep your rivals again, to, do even more than what they did this past year. And if he can't, things get quite interesting in terms of those conversations. I've been very open over the years that I've been rooting for him. I think he's a really good guy. I think he came in and reestablished a foundation after the program had basically been burned to the ground under Steve Adazio. But now that you have laid that foundation and you're back to a competitive stage, you've got to do more. You've got to take it to the next level. You've got to have some success, because with what CSU is spending, the results are going to be demanded. And frankly, with all this conference realignment stuff, like, it's never been more pressing to have success. So we'll see what happens there. I think it's going to be pretty interesting. John says, any news on CSU Pro Day? It happened during the NCAA or the Mountain West tournament. Heard Howell did pretty well. Torrey didn't participate. There's not a lot of guys from this roster last year that are going to be draft picks. I think you can get Torrey's certainly going to get drafted. I think Howell has a chance to be a day 3 pick. I think a bunch of other guys will get opportunities, in camp and stuff. Jacob Gardner, Drew Moss, Henry Blackburn, if he chooses. But yeah, I mean, it just wasn't a year where there was a ton to focus on. Aaron says, are we sure Xavier Ducel's out of eligibility? He's only a few schools away from playing for all the Mountain West schools. Xavier Ducel, all-time leading three-point shooter in the Mountain West, started at Wyoming, went to Fresno State, ended at Nevada. So, yeah, it would be hilarious if he actually was able to keep it going. But he is, in fact, out of eligibility as far as I know. Austin says, not necessarily related to basketball, to the basketball hire, but what do you think about the Under Armour agreement? Is there a chance the school switches to a new company? Or are we stuck with Under Armour? I've said this a couple of times now. Nike doesn't want CSU, guys. They've made that pretty clear over the years. They've got CU and Air Force. They don't feel that CSU is a moneymaker. So I don't think they're going anywhere else. Maybe Adidas. Maybe you could get an Adidas deal or something like that. But Under Armour actually has been pretty good to CSU in terms of the customization and the alternates and that type of stuff. Like, they've done a lot more for us from a unique standpoint than some of their other partners. I get the desire to be with a different brand. I would love to be a Nike school, love to be a Jordan school. But I don't anticipate that changing anytime soon. Aaron, how many actual assistant coaches does that pool of money apply to? I think just as far as you can stretch it, basically. That's kind of up to you. I mean, I'm sure there are rules about exactly how many coaches you can have, but nowadays you're able to come up with so many different roles. Even if they're not technically an assistant coach, they can be, on the bench there. But, pretty standard, you're going to have about 3-4 guys. Brett said, did the coaches pool money stay the same for the upcoming year? I believe it's jumped a little bit. I think it went from around $1 million to 1.2 million. So that's a nice little pool to be able to build a staff with. How many spring transfers do you expect them to add? Should be lots of P4 players hitting the portal when they realize where they stand on the depth chart. I don't know if you're talking football or basketball, honestly. So we'll have to see. I imagine they'll add a couple more on the football side once spring ball concludes, but you'll also lose a couple of guys. So it kind of just depends on how many scholarships you have to work with. Like, Mile High Minute, should CSU and Minnesota schedule some games? Yeah, why not? I'd love it. Especially if they'd be willing to play a home and home. If you could get a Big Ten school to come to Fort Collins, that'd be a great opportunity. The atmosphere would be awesome. I'd be all for it. Whether they're willing to do that or not, I don't know. I don't know if I would be willing to go just to Minnesota. I don't think that's that desirable of a game, to be honest. But for the Medved Farokhmanesh storyline, I think it would be fun. Mount Hyman says, how many views do we get for CSU Maryland, CSU Memphis game? That's a good question, actually. I'll dive into that, and maybe I can tweet it out later, or I can talk about it tomorrow if I can find some accurate numbers. I know the NCAA tournament as a whole viewership was tremendous. It's up big time, like the most viewed tournament since the 90s for CBS and all that. So there's a lot of interest in March Madness, despite all of the hot takes about the sport being dead. And no Cinderellas, meaning nobody cares. Does not seem to be the case based on what the numbers say. But that's all I've got for you guys this morning. Shout out to everybody that's rocking with us. Again, we'll have plenty of spring football content coming your way. Plenty of recruitment content on the hoop side. We'll talk about the transfers as they make their decisions. Same thing with the staff stuff. Much love, y'all. We are always proud to be. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.